Welcome to London Lights. I'm your host, Dan Mailer, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Tyrone Traher. Oh, I said that right?
That's right.
He's a retired big band leader, and we're going to be talking today about someone who's going to remain a mystery here for a minute. But first, Londoners, before we go to our guest, I want to run a little quiz by you. See if you can help me with this. Answer this question. Which London native and his band sold 100 million records in their lifetime, and maybe as many as 300 million? Had 21 number one records on the charts. Yes, that's 21 number ones. Had at least one record on the charts at all times for 23 years, from 1929 through 1952. Appeared in numerous Hollywood films and had his own television show. Played and performed at every presidential inauguration from President Roosevelt through President Jimmy Carter. Was even the focus of a cartoon, a Woody Woodpecker cartoon. He has a bronze plaque to his honor and their honor on the beer store located at the corner of Richmond Street and Horton Street to this very day. You don't know the answer? Well, stay tuned for this incredible story. Tyrone, who are we talking about?
Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians.
The one and only.
Correct.
And you know, he was born in 1902, and we only have a half hour to talk about this incredible, rich, tremendous legacy of Guy Lombardo and the Royal Canadians. So I'm sorry to put this kind of pressure on you, Tyrone.
Right.
I think you're up to the task.
I'm going to do the best I can.
All right. I see a red jacket behind you. What is that?
Well, that's was Guy Lombardo's jacket that he wore every New Year's Eve from 1929, I think, up to 1974. And the Lombardo family in 1985 or 86 gave it to me as a gift.
Wow.
They came for the opening of the Guy Lombardo Museum.
Yeah.
And during the Royal Canadian Big Band Festival in that period. The crest there, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a crest on the jacket and was made by Catholic nuns in Quebec. And it was embroidered, and it's a beautiful crest, which says Royal Canadians on it. And of course, Guy Lombardo got the name Royal Canadians from two items. One, the Royal Canadian Regiment here in London, which was based in London, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Right.
So that's where it comes from.
Well, I should mention a little bit about your credentials. So you're co-founder of the Royal Canadian Big Band Music Festival, which ran from 1985 through 2001. And you're the co-founder of the Guy Lombardo Museum. We've got a tremendous story to tell. And like every story, it's got to begin somewhere. And I went by a house on Simcoe Street, which was the Guy Lombardo home as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Dad was a tailor, and he was a singer part-time, and he needed somebody to accompany him when he did his gigs. So he taught his boys to play instruments. There was already an established Italian community in London at the time. Music was a cornerstone of that community. Can you walk us through their history, Tyrone?
Yes. Well, the Guy Lombardo's mother and father came to Canada, Papa Lombardo and Mama Lombardo, about late 1890s. And they came to London, Canada. Guy Lombardo's father was a tailor by trade, and his mother was the first secretary in London, female secretary in London, Ontario. And I believe it was with Huron and Erie, which eventually over time became Canada Trust. So it's quite a history there. And in 1901, the Mr. and Mrs. Lombardo married, and in 1902, Guy Lombardo was born. And he was born at their home at 202 Simcoe Street here in London, Ontario. And then, of course, Carmen, Victor, Liebert, Joseph, Rosemarie, and Elaine followed. About two or 3 years after Guy Lombardo was born, they moved to Horton and Richmond, where the Labatt's Brewery is, and their home was there. And so they lived there. They went to St. Peter's School here in London, and music was a big part of the Lombardo family, and Mr. Lombardo, as you said, was a performer, and he would have Guy Lombardo accompany him during performances. And back at the back of the tailor's shop, it was a rehearsal location for the Lombardo boys when they were young. And Professor Venuta here in London taught the boys music and how to play their instruments, and the theory behind music. And that's where they got their beginning in music. And moving forward, approximately 1914, they played. They weren't called Guy Lombardo's Royal Canadians then. They were called Guy Lombardo and his Brothers Orchestra. And they played at a St. Mary's Catholic Church, their first performance, public performance, as Guy Lombardo's Brothers Orchestra on a Sunday afternoon at a tea party. And I believe their first paid engagement was by Sir Adam Beck, who actually paid the Lombardo boys to perform. And that would be just after 1914. And of course, they moved on, coming up into 1918, 1919. Well, they played in venues around London and southwestern Ontario, Winter Gardens. They played in Grand Bend and Port Stanley and different venues. And then about 1919, they decided to go to Cleveland. And they were, as it's been many times said, that the Beatles were the first orchestra or band or musical performance to make it big in the United States. But the truth is, Lombardo in 1919 was the first non-American band to break into the United States. And by 1927, was one of the most popular musical entities in the world.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. And what I really like about Lombardo is he was really dedicated to melodies. Melodies are the key to a great song. In fact, his motto was, I want to play a melody that music that people can dance to and for people to fall in love to. And there's an interesting story. Of course, back in those days, if you wanted to be rebellious in music, you played jazz.
Yes.
And Guy Lombardo's father, Papa Lombardo, as you refer to him, he didn't want that. He wanted them to stick to melodies. In fact, there's a story about Guy Lombardo getting a little bit carried away, a little bit jazzy on the violin, and his father took the violin and broke it over his head. Is that true?
I wouldn't doubt that, but I've never heard that, but I know that Papa Lombardo was strict. He was strict not only on how they played their instruments, but having knowledge, the theory behind music. And he was strict about, being on time for performances and being a tailor. He made sure that the Lombardo boys and that band were impeccably dressed for all performances.
Yeah. And so his father instilled these values in them that they carried on and became very successful with.
Correct.
The story about melody is interesting because although he had never admitted, even Kurt Cobain of Nirvana realized that good melodies are what make a song attractive to the listeners.
Right.
That's what Guy Lombardo really honed in on, wasn't it? He loved melodies and he created these beautiful melodies. Some called it the sweetest music this side of heaven.
Correct. Well, they did, but the thing made Guy Lombardo, extra popular. He actually made what they called touch dancing acceptable and popular, like couples dancing together on dance floors, and he made that popular. And he had those sweet melodies. He had the singing saxophones, they used to be called, with Carmen and Victor and in the band there. And so we have, and in the performances when he played, he played in well-known establishments, restaurants, he didn't overplay too loud so that people couldn't speak during a dinner or dancing. And it was a perfect fit for that period of time in the music industry and performing. And people just loved to go dance to Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians and that sweetest music this side of heaven.
Yeah. And I've always been fascinated about how a successful act goes from A to B. what do they do? What's the trajectory of their career? And I think the big thing, as I understand it, for Lombardos, we've got Port Stanley, which was the Coney Island of its day.
Yes.
And their first really big break was Hopkins Casino, which was there before the Stork Club was built. And
Right.
we were hired to be the house band for one summer, I think in 1923. They did that gig. They
Hmm.
were recognized as being so good. And then they realized they could do better and they could really do something with what they were doing. And off they went to Cleveland, correct?
Correct. They went over to Cleveland and performed. And, you know, when the Lombardo family were here in London during the opening of the museum and a few festivals that they came to visit and participate in, they talked about, or Victor talked about, that it was not easy street when they got to the United States. They went in 1923 to 1927, and it was you know, developing their audience and developing their reputation, and it took, you know, a handful of years to get there. It wasn't, you know, just hand it to them on a silver platter. But the big thing that really helped the Lombardo family, or the Lombardo Orchestra and Guy Lombardo, is when radio broke.
Hmm.
And you know, prior to radio, well, radio became a vehicle to become well known. Now, the Lombardo Orchestra and Guy Lombardo agreed to play free on radio, and where other orchestras would not do that, they wanted to be paid to play on the radio. And it worked out for Lombardo that he became well known quickly, and people became very admired his music and that sweet sound that he was performing, and then started to flock to the band and come and see and dance to the orchestra.
Right.
So radio was a big piece of that. And then TV later in the 50s
Right.
really propelled him.
So it was interesting. So they go to Cleveland. They struggled a little bit there. Then they came back. And in the meantime, the Stork Club was built in Port Stanley. They performed there. And then 1927, they're off to Chicago. And big things happen. So, hey, we're going to come back in a minute, but we have to take a commercial break. Stay with us. We've got Tyrone with us to talk about Guy Lombardo and this incredible success story of the London band called Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back here on London Lights with Tyrone Traher, and we're talking about the one and only Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. Now, I've got to tell you, Tyrone, I remember as a teenager getting into a debate with my grandmother. My parents met on the beach in Port Stanley, and my grandparents met at the Stork Club. They had a dance together, and the rest was history.
Right.
So my grandma was a big fan of Guy Lombardo, and when she heard me playing this noisy rock and roll, Beatles, she said, "What is this? This is not music.
Right.
Music is Guy Lombardo, the
Mhm.
sweetest music this side of heaven." So
Right.
her and I had a debate, and you know, I got to be honest, at the time, I could not appreciate what she was saying at all.
Mhm.
But even as I prepared for this show, I listened to some of the music by Guy Lombardo. We're talking superior musicianship.
Absolutely.
And when I actually took the time to listen to what they produced in the studio,
Mhm.
I was blown away. This is some fantastic music by this London band, London-based band that became so huge in the world. Would you
Mhm.
agree with that?
Absolutely. And the thing, they're all London boys that were in that band, and they're either taught by Professor Venuta, or my grandfather taught one of the boys trombone.
Wow.
And they all were from London, Ontario, but they were well-trained musicians. Now, London, Ontario is, you know, I don't want to offshoot here, has had a rich history of great musicians that have come from this city and still do today. They have some wonderful young musicians today. But back in those days, you know, London, Canada was the mecca of some great, well-known musicians.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because you know, this Guy Lombardo story is a story that's starting to fade from our consciousness, and I don't think we should allow that to happen. We have to keep this memory alive. And I know you feel the same way. And that's why you started the museum. I mean,
Mm,
these guys became so big. They're almost like the Elvis of their day. Hollywood came calling. Hey, we got to put Guy Lombardo in a movie. We got to give Guy Lombardo his own TV show.
right.
Like this was big stuff. But as big as they got, they didn't forget London, did they?
They did not. Like Guy Lombardo was a big booster, and the Lombardo family, but Guy Lombardo was a big booster for London. And I can remember Colonel Lawson telling me that when they needed, some help to attract a business to London, or a business opportunity, or a corporate leader to come to London and visit the community, Guy Lombardo, they would call him, and he would, with his charismatic way, encourage these businesses to consider London, Canada as a place to do business. And in 1937, of course, there was the big flood of 37. I think they were in Detroit when the flood happened. And when he heard about that flood, he canceled his shows, uh, eventually went back and did them, but canceled those shows immediately, came to London and did two benefit concerts at Lowe's Theatre and the Capitol Theatre, and the funds went to help people who lost their homes in the flood.
Wow.
And so he was a big booster for London. Never forgot London. Came here in 1955, performed. Came here in 1967 to perform as well. Or many times he came to London. Of course, he brought his Tempo 7 here and showcased it on Fanshawe Lake.
That's his racing boat.
That is his power boat that he had, which was one of what was the fastest boat in the world in 1955. So he never forgot London, Ontario, and the Lombardo family never forgot London, Ontario. And I can remember when we started the Royal Canadian Big Band Music Festival in 84, 85, contacting the Lombardo family and asking them to consider coming to London. And within 30 seconds, they said yes.
I think I think it's easy to forget how big they were. I was talking to my friend Kevin in Pittsburgh as I prepared for this show and mentioned Guy Lombardo. He goes, "Oh, I know them. We used to
Yeah,
watch them every New Year's Eve." Now,
absolutely.
I've got to tell you, and we're going to talk about New Year's Eve here in a moment because Guy Lombardo and New Year's Eve were synonymous for
Absolutely.
many, many years. And my generation, it was Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve,
Correct.
which has gotten progressively worse since Dick Clark has passed away. I
Right.
couldn't stand New Year's Eve, the New Year's Eve shows this past year, and maybe the lockdown had something to do with it. I don't know.
Right.
But Guy Lombardo became Mr. New Year's Eve for many years. He played at the Waldorf Astoria. They had to hear him play. They did the countdown as Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians were playing. I mean, that says something, and that went on for many years, didn't it?
Well, from 1929 to, well, the band last performance, I think, was 77 or 78. They played New Year's Eve, first of all, from the Roosevelt Grill, and then they moved over to the Waldorf Astoria and performed. And the New Year's Eve, I mean, well, Steve Allen said, I mean, Santa Claus has Christmas. Guy Lombardo had New Year's Eve, and that's a true statement. Guy Lombardo, was part of the whole concept of the ball dropping at midnight from Times Square. The All Lang Syne. I mean, it was it was his signature piece, All Lang Syne, and he made that an annual midnight New Year's Eve tradition, which still is there today. It's
Right.
it was Guy Lombardo that did that midnight New Year's Eve, 10, 9, 8, 2, 1, la da 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 da, all that. That was Guy Lombardo, and balloons dropping and all that business. And he made that an annual tradition. And I think the last, just to kind of get a feel for it, the last television presentation New Year's Eve from the Waldorf, there was 55 million viewers worldwide that
Wow.
watched that band.
Wow.
And
And of course, Old Lang Syne is a Scottish ballad.
yes, it is.
May old acquaintance be forgot,
Right.
etc.
Right,
And
but
he made that.
formed that, made it was a signature piece, right? And
Yeah, and they still play it now after the
yeah,
ball drops.
of course. I mean,
So
what
that's
else?
a tribute to Londoner Guy
That was a
Lombardo.
liner that did that, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, like think like 55 million viewers worldwide. And the other piece, if you notice, if you can look back on some of the video footage, just before midnight, he would always say, hello to, everyone worldwide, but hello to Canada and hello to London, Ontario.
Wow, that is so cool.
Mhm.
So just looking at it now, the guy Lombardo is made his mark. He's playing for all the presidents when they get sworn in on the inaugural balls. He's huge, and he's this almost rock star type figure. But he keeps coming back to London. He doesn't forget Londoners. And one of the questions I had as I prepared, they talk about the number of records that he sold and
Mhm.
then many number one records. There's, I guess, a bit of a debate whether he sold 100 million records or 300 million, but it was at least 100 million, which is extraordinary in its day before the internet and even record stores in some cases. Um, it was a lot of records. Why the debate, though, about the number?
Well, Victor Lombardo's told me verbally here when he was in London. I asked him how many recordings the Lombardos sold. He said by the 1950s they had sold 100 million recordings. By the from 1927 to 1954 or 5, they had 100 million recordings sold worldwide.
Incredible.
And so from 1950 to 77, that's where that piece comes in. What did they sell? And there's estimates anywhere between 100 million to 300 million recordings. So, it's somewhere in that range. And, truthfully, I believe it's, probably between 200 and 300 million recordings of his music worldwide. And I
Well,
like.
he started out as a Londoner and he never forgot London, but he did live in different places in the United States. I know he had a band shell or something in New York. He opened nightclubs in the United States and lived in the wintertime in Florida with his brothers. They each had houses nearby each other, near, I think it's St. Pete's.
Mhm.
Um, but when he passed away, was there a funeral here to recognize his achievements or anything like that?
Not a funeral here. The funeral was in, I believe it was in New York, the funeral. I'm not 100% sure about that. No, in 1977, when they were building it was then called the Wonderland. He died in November of 77, Guy Lombardo. So the Wonderland Road Bridge was being built at the time, and they named it after Guy Lombardo, the Guy Lombardo Bridge, down by where the Wonderland Gardens
Sure.
used to be, right? So
Yeah.
no, they didn't, not that I know of, had any celebratory of life event or anything like that. But it was just shortly after that, about 1984, that it was thought that a music festival in tribute of the rich heritage of the dance bands, the big bands, and the history of Guy Lombardo, um, like have a summertime attraction, which became the Royal Canadian Big Band Music Festival. And Colonel Lawson, was the driving force behind that.
Yeah.
He wanted a free admission Canada Day show in memory of Lombardo, which was a big, it was a big show. And I want to tell you something that for Londoners, that when I used to organize the festival and put on the festival, we used to have 2,000 Americans visit London, Ontario faithfully because of the connection of London and Guy Lombardo. Americans love Guy Lombardo. And one thing you don't have to do is you don't have to really, you just have to say Guy Lombardo,
Yeah.
and they know exactly what you're talking about.
Well, he's left a tremendous legacy. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a statement that excluding the British invasion, the two biggest entertainment acts in the last 100 years were both born in London, Ontario.
Absolutely.
Guy Lombardo and Justin Bieber.
Absolutely.
How does that happen? London is a special place,
It is.
and we've got a lot to be proud of here. And certainly with Guy Lombardo, he's left a great legacy. What do you think his legacy is?
Well, his legacy is his music in New Year's Eve. You know, he had the sweetest music this side of heaven. He was had that great. People loved to dance to his music. You know, his biggest legacy, I think, was it was happy music.
Hmm.
That's what Victor Lombardo used to say to me when he talked to me. That you know, he played "Boo Hoo," "Little Coquette," "Seems Like Old Times." You know, those types of songs. They were effervescent. They were bubbly. They were happy music, and you know, Guy Lombardo, when he got his was given his honorary doctorate degree at the University of Western, he said, you know a little music. It's a light load to carry.
Yeah, great. We've got to wrap up. We're running out of time. I
Yeah.
think the message too is it doesn't matter where you come from. If you're passionate about what you do and you
Absolutely.
work hard and you show up on time, as you indicated,
Right.
you can be successful. And that's
Absolutely.
an encouraging, inspirational story that Guy Lombardo leaves us. Thanks for being here today, Tyrone. It's been a pleasure speaking to you about Guy Lombardo and the Royal Canadians. Keep on grooving.
Yep.
And that wraps up this season of London Lights. And what a fitting end to talk about the great Guy Lombardo and his Royal Canadians. London's been blessed with some great entertainers and performers and people. And London has a very rich legacy, has made a big impact on the world. So stay tuned. We hope to be back for season 2 in the fall with more London Lights. Thanks for being with us this season, and I hope you've enjoyed the programs. Take care.